Cool. Okay. So this is the start of a thing that I might do with some regularity. I'm not entirely sure. I'm just testing something out. But I've been reading this book, For New Liberty by Murray Rothbard, which is preposterous, and I'll probably be reviewing it in the future. However, I think that you folks would love to hear a little bit about it in the meantime, because it is just too ridiculous to pass up. But while we're going, I'm gonna check. People are coming in to the thing. I was gonna check my phone and see if. Okay, so there is a live. That's not the picture that I put up, but I wonder if I can edit. Let me see if I could do this from my phone here. I'm just killing a little time, I guess, as people roll in. I'm not seeing how to change the thumbnail. I might just leave the thumbnail because that's not even on this computer. Cool. I am going to open a beverage. Please save questions till the end, because I'm going to focus on the reading. So, what this is you are going to watch me read a chapter, or I might not get through the whole chapter, of For a New Liberty, which is essentially the and cap version of the bread book. And then watch me read it and enjoy and laugh with me as we read this. So this came out in 1973. That's when the copyright was, so keep that in mind as we go forward. It is a very large book. This is the Boomer edition, I think, because it is very large and very large print. I don't know why. It now doesn't fit comfortably on my bookshelf, which is annoying. But I suppose without further ado, let's get to the reading, right? All right. Oops, did I skip? Sorry, I think I skipped. I lost my place here. Okay. So this is Chapter 12, The Public Sector, Number 3, Police, Law, and the Courts. Again, this is an anarcho-capitalist solution to these problems. All right. Police protection. The market and private enterprise do exist, and so most people can readily envision a free market in most goods and services. Probably the most difficult single area to grasp, however, is the abolition of government operations in the service of protection, police, the courts, etc. The area encompassing defense of person and property against attack or invasion. How could private enterprise and the free market possibly provide such service? How could police, legal systems, judicial services, law enforcement, prisons, how could these be provided in a free market? We have already seen how a great deal of police protection, at least, could be supplied by the various owners of street and land area. But we now need to examine this entire area systematically. So just to catch folks up, in the previous chapter was talking about privatized streets, and the solution for having police protection on privately owned streets was either there would be a corporation which owned streets, which might have a financial motivation to keep the streets safe, and so they would hire private police, or the homeowners or store owners of a given area would own and operate the streets around them and would hire a private oh my god, that's so dumb. Oh, it's so ridiculous. Okay. Unfortunately, you'll have missed that part, but let's just keep going. In the first place, there is a common fallacy, held even by most advocates of laissez-faire, that the government must supply police protection, as if police protection were a single absolute entity, a fixed quantity of something which the government supplies to all. But in actual fact, there is no absolute commodity called police protection, any more than there is an absolute single commodity called food or shelter. It is true that everyone pays taxes for a seemingly fixed quantity of protection, but this is a myth. In actual fact, there are almost infinite degrees of all sorts of protection. For any given person or business, the police can provide everything from a policeman on the beat who patrols once a night, to 2 policemen patrolling constantly on each block, to cruising patrol cars, to 1 or even several round-the-clock personal guards. Furthermore, there are many other decisions the police must make, the complexity of which becomes evident as soon as we look beneath the veil of the myth of absolute protection. I would agree with this to the extent that I think Michael Parenti discussed this, that if you compare the police response to like a physical assault or a sexual assault to like a bank robbery, obviously in our like capitalist state system that we have, the police response is much more effective in regards to the bank robbery than in regards to the sexual assault. Let's keep this going. How shall the police allocate their funds, which are, of course, always limited, as are the funds of all other individuals, organizations, and agencies? How much shall the police invest in electronic equipment, fingerprint equipment, detectives as against uniformed police, patrol cars as against foot police, etc.? The point is that the government has no rational way to make these allocations. So here, let's go ahead and bracket this. The point is that the government has no rational way to make these allocations. I find that, hard to believe. They have statistical analysis just like, anyone else. I have a relative that does statistical analysis on, crime, so that certain blocks you see the rate at which crimes are committed. And so, what demographic areas need cameras or should have however many patrol cars. So there's nothing unique to capitalism that some other system couldn't do that. All right, let's keep going. The government only knows that it has a limited budget. Its allocation of funds are then subject to the full play of politics, boondoggling, and bureaucratic inefficiency, with no indication at all as to whether the police department is serving the customers in a way responsive to their desires or whether it is doing so efficiently. The situation would be different if police services were supplied on a free, competitive market. In that case, consumers would pay for whatever degree of protection they wish to purchase, providing you have the money to purchase such a thing. Obviously, that never comes up. The consumers who just want to see a policeman once in a while would pay less than those who want continuous patrolling, and far less than those who demand 24-hour bodyguard service. So let's go ahead and write in the margins here, assuming they had the funds and assuming no corners were cut, because we know like a private supplied service also would like to cut corners, as we see companies doing. All right, let's keep going. On the free market, protection would be supplied in proportion and in whatever way that the customers wished to pay for it. A drive for efficiency would be ensured, as it always is on the market, by the compulsion to make profits and avoid losses and thereby keep costs low and to serve the highest demands of the consumers. Any police firm that suffers from gross inefficiency would soon go bankrupt and disappear. Let's go ahead and add a bracket here. And in the margins, why we don't see this in other industries, right? Plenty of inefficiencies in our regular capitalist industries. There's no reason to assume that efficiencies will magically disappear. One big problem a government police force must always face is what laws really to enforce. Police departments are theoretically faced with the absolute injunction, enforce all laws, but in practice, a limited budget forces them to allocate their personnel and equipment to the most urgent crimes. You hear that, folks? Under this police state, the police services are rationed. I suppose that's true. For example, I guess Epstein, they just couldn't afford to do suicide watch on Epstein. That had to be rationed to do something else. Just kidding. Okay. But the absolute dictum pursues them and works against a rational allocation of resources. On the free market, what would be enforced is whatever the customers are willing to pay for. Suppose, for example, that Mr. Jones has a precious gem he believes might soon be stolen. He can ask and pay for round-the-clock police protection at whatever strength he may wish to work out with the police company. He might, on the other hand, also have a private road on his estate that he doesn't want many people to travel on, but he might not care very much about trespassers on the road. In that case, he won't devote any police resources to protecting the road. As on the market in general, it is up to the consumer, and since all of us are consumers, this means each person individually decides how much and what kind of protection he wants and is willing to buy. Have you folks seen the YouTube video? There's one that's privatized the police department. There's one that's privatized the fire department, and it was in regards to socialized healthcare. I really recommend those videos. Maybe I'll throw them in the description or something. But the privatized the fire department video on YouTube has this hilarious part where it's like, your neighbor's house is on fire and it's about to catch your garage on fire, but you just remodeled your kitchen, so you can go ahead and let your garage go. That's what this sounds like. Obviously our example for having privatized police is a Mr. Jones with a precious gem and a private road going up to his estate. It's not like a single mother who's like, oh, hey, by the way, I'm worried that my, the father of the child is going to come and there's going to be this problem. And so here I have no money to pay for a private police force. That's not the question here. It's Mr. Jones and his precious gems and private estate that is our example for police. So cool. But not really, but okay. Let's keep going. Actually, before I keep going, this is enjoyable, right? We like this. I got 55 people watching. Yeah. 21 likes. This is good. I'm going to keep going. I think I think chat is a lot slower, than I am. But I'm going to keep going. Okay. All that we have said about landowners, police, all that we have said about landowners' police applies to private police in general. Free market police would not only be efficient, they would have a strong incentive to be courteous and to refrain from brutality against either their clients or their clients' friends or customers. Seem to be missing someone, Mr. Rothbard, but not their victims. See private prison abuse. I forget which video I did this in, but one of my videos I had shown a clip, that clip from the private prison where they're having inmates crawl on the floor and they're getting attacked by dogs. Horrific human rights disaster. So that seems to be not a problem to Mr. Rothbard here. Also, private military contractor abuse could be comparable to what a private police abuse might be. Many are disqualified police/military. I don't have any stats on this in front of me at the moment, but I have heard that both with private prisons as well as with like Blackwater, private security forces and stuff, a lot of these people are retired or defunct police and military. So let's say you were a prison guard or you were a policeman and you were fired or let go or laid off on kind of suspicious circumstances. You know, you don't quite meet the requirements psychologically or otherwise to be, you know, a policeman at the state level. Well, you just turn around and get hired by a private prison or by a private military security firm which has much lower standards of quality. Done. So no, that looks like a disaster, Mr. Rothbard, but so is your philosophy. So let's continue. A private central... a super chat. Just wanted to throw you some support since this is the first time I've seen you open up. Yeah, I couldn't figure out how to do super chats before. I suck at making money, in all honesty. So, but that's fine. Thank you very much. Okay. A private central park would be guarded efficiently in order to maximize park revenue, rather than have a prohibitive curfew imposed on innocent and paying customers. Oh, because of course you will pay to enter the public park in a capitalist, anarcho-capitalist system. There's so much freedom that you pay to use the public park. I guess you pay for the maintenance of public parks through taxes, but that's democratic, where this isn't. Okay, a free market in police would reward efficiency and courteous police protection to customers and penalize any falling off from this standard. No longer would there be a current disjunction between service and payment, inherent in all government operations. A disjunction which means that police, like all other government agencies, acquire their revenue not voluntarily and competitively from customers, but from taxpayers coercively. The assumption being here that capitalists want to be upfront. Like there's this idea, you know, okay, there's all these companies making computers. Whoever can make the fastest computer is going to make more sales. And that's like a good thing, I guess, for the sake of this argument. However, if all of the computers are, let's just say, are created using precious metals, I don't know, let's say coltan, and it's mined in horrendous conditions at gunpoint in, you know, Central Africa, all companies making computers have a motivation to hide or downplay or not expose, you know, that seedy underbelly to the public. Now, that would go with any private industry. So if you have a private police force, like any other private industry, they have externalities. They have things about them that they would be motivated to conceal from the public, which puts a complete hole in this idea that efficiency in helping others would be this prime motivating force. Okay, back to the text. In fact, as government police have become increasingly inefficient, customers have been turning more and more to private forms of protection. We've already mentioned block or neighborhood protection. There are also private guards, insurance companies, private detectives, and such increasingly sophisticated equipment as safes, locks, and closed-circuit TV and burglar alarms. The President's Commission on Law Enforcement and the Administration of Justice estimated in 1969 that government police cost the American public $2.8 billion a year, while it spends $1.35 billion on private protection services and another $200 million on equipment, so that private protection expenses amounted to over half the outlay of government police. These figures should give pause to those credulous folks who believe that police protection is somehow, by some mystic right of power, necessary and furthermore an attribute of state sovereignty. All right, awesome. So, you know, as people push to cut funding for this or that social service, and you have these very wealthy individuals who can afford private security and private, they got cameras and alarms and stuff. That just proves like that the system isn't working, of course, because through the capitalist lens, if people are spending money on it, then that means that's the only measure of the quality of the item. All right. Every reader of detective fiction knows that private insurance detectives are far more efficient than the police in recovering stolen property. Not only is the insurance company impelled by economics to serve the customer and thereby try to avoid paying benefits, but the major focus of the insurance company is very different from that of police. The police, standing as they do for the mythical society, we live in a society, are primarily interested in catching and punishing the criminal. Restoring the stolen loot to the victim is strictly secondary. To the insurance company and its detectives, on the other hand, the prime concern is recovering the loot. And apprehension and punishment of the criminal is secondary to the primary purpose of aiding the victim of crime. Here we see again the difference between private firm impelled to serve the customer victim of crime and the public police, which is under no such economic compulsion. Again, this has to do with just money. I mean, whether it's like the capitalist state police or a private security firm, like I said before, if someone robs a company, then the motivation is to secure private property. Whereas if it's a sexual assault, they send one or two cops. We've all heard whatever horror stories you put in there, the rape, shelves of rape kits that are untested and all kinds of horror stories, right? So if the motivation is private property money making, you can point to the police or a private police force and show that some action's being made. But if you point to someone without money, which seems to be obviously the biggest issue here, then no movements are made. All right, back to the text. We cannot blueprint a market that exists only as a hypothesis, but it is reasonable to believe that police service in the libertarian society, no such thing called a society, but okay, a libertarian society, kind of stepping on your own foot there, Rothbard, would be supplied by the landowner or by insurance companies. Since insurance companies would be paying benefits to victims of crime, it is highly likely that they would supply police service as a means of keeping down crime, and hence their payment of benefits. It is certainly likely in any case that police service would be paid for in regular monthly premiums with the police agency, whether insurance company or not, called on whenever needed. Okay, so, a $10, love your videos, rad, buy yourself some bacon strips. Will do. I kind of like the dehydrated lamb lung myself. I'm pretty fancy. But thank you very much, Charlie Fairchild. Okay. Where was I in my argument? Right. This insurance company thing is hilarious. I don't know to what extent you folks have needed to... So I had a broken bone a year or two ago, and going to the hospital and getting that taken care of was fine. Getting the insurance company to pay their part was a nightmare. They're trying to like weasel their way out of, okay, well, why aren't you trying to get, the other person involved in the broken bone, like have their insurance pay their portion? Oh, well, do we really have to pay? They try and weasel their way out of payment. So like, do you really want to go up to the private police, assuming you even have the funds to pay for a private police, rather than equitably using taxes where different levels of income paid proportionally for the taxes to allow police to protect society as a whole, rather than that somewhat equitable distribution? You have a private system where only those who can afford protection can afford it. You go to the police or your insurance company or whatever, and then they try and weasel their way out of it like insurance companies do with medical stuff. Like you're like, oh, Mr. protection insurance company. My house was burglarized. Oh, well, did you leave your door unlocked? What kind of neighborhood you live in? We only pay, our premium is only this amount because of the neighborhood you live in it requires higher costs of protection. And so we're not going to, there's going to be a copay involved. Like, what the, oh my gosh. Okay. I hope like the logic, follows and I'm not just, meandering into absurdity here, but this is what you're dealing with when looking at, this kind of a system. Okay, back to the text. This supplies what would be the first simple answer to a typical nightmare question of people who first hear about the idea of a totally private police. Why, that means that if you're attacked or robbed, you have to rush over to a policeman and start dickering on how much it will cost to defend you. That seems to be what I brought up. A moment's reflection should show that no service is supplied in this way on the free market. Obviously, a person who wants to be protected by agency A or insurance company B will pay regular payments, will pay regular premiums rather than wait to be attacked before buying protection, assuming that you can afford the premiums. But suppose an emergency occurs and a company A policeman sees someone being mugged. Will he stop and ask the victim if he has bought insurance from company A? In the first place, this sort of street crime will be taken care of, as we noted above, by the police hired by whomever owns the street in question, assuming that whoever owns the street is just going to pay for the protection of strangers willy-nilly. There was a documentary about Walmart where they were discovering that in their gigantic parking lots, when people are carrying their pushing their huge cart full of goods to the way back of the parking lot, far away from the storefront, people would come up and steal their cart of goods and run off with it. And so Walmart wanted to try and combat this, and they did so by having security in like golf carts roam around the parking lots. And that totally reduced the occurrence of both people robbing the goods, and then there was also like some other assaults and sexual assaults that had taken place. Except Walmart crunched the numbers and decided, hey, wait a minute, the people pushing the cart full of goods, we already have their money. Like, we have no interest in protecting these goods once they've left the store. And so they canceled the program. So I imagine that kind of thing is what would actually take place. All right. Wrong, but let's continue. But what of the unlikely case that a neighborhood does not have street police, and a policeman of company A happens to see someone being attacked? Will he rush to the victim's defense? That, of course, would be up to company A, but it is scarcely conceivable that private police companies would not cultivate goodwill by making a policy of giving free aid to victims in emergency situations, and perhaps ask the rescued victim for a voluntary donation afterward. In the case of a homeowner being robbed or attacked, then of course he will call on whichever police company he has been using. He will call police company A rather than the police he calls on now. Okay, let's bring this back to the insurance company example, because they basically are parallel. Do we see insurance companies, motivated by goodwill to help uninsured people as like a publicity stunt to cultivate goodwill? The insurance company A, we see that you were in a car accident and you're uninsured. Let's help you. And then maybe you'll give a voluntary donation. We don't see that in like a private industry of a similar sort now. So I don't know why we would see, a private police force helping uninsured people, risking their necks and stuff, with no incentive to do so. Okay. Cool. Competition ensures efficiency, low price, and high quality. No, it doesn't. And there is no reason to assume a priori, as many people do, that there is something divinely ordained about having only one police agency in a given geographical area. Economists have often claimed that the production of certain goods or services is a natural monopoly. so that more than one private agency could not long survive in a given area. Yeah, I'd say that's true, especially with something like water, right? People complain that if a private company controls the pipes leading to your house, there's not exactly room for competition. Like, are a bunch of other companies going to pipe additional, sewage to your house to be competitive? I had this argument with someone, and their answer was, oh, well, of course, a competing water company will ship truckloads of bottled water to that home to convince that person to trade water companies. Oh my gosh, this stuff is ridiculous. Okay, back to the text. Perhaps, although only a truly free market could decide the matter once and for all. Only the market can decide what and how many firms and of what size and quality can survive in active competition. But there is no reason to suppose in advance that police protection is a natural monopoly. After all, insurance companies are not, and if we can have metropolitan, equitable, prudential, etc. insurance companies coexisting side by side, why not metropolitan, equitable, and prudential police protection companies? Go ahead and add to the margin here. Yeah, multiple police companies hiding evidence from each other or passing the buck on hard to solve cases. I mean, that's no different. So back to my story about having the broken bone. At the time, I was under the age limit for still being under my parents' insurance, but my parents are divorced. And my mom's insurance company and my dad's insurance company passed the buck back and forth on who was going to pay the amount first versus who was going to come in and pay after. I can't imagine, again, if you had the money for a good quality private police service, or more than one in the case mentioned where they're competing, that they wouldn't hide evidence from each other or, impede the investigations of one another for the sake of being the one that gets your money in the end, or for the one who doesn't have to pay out. This is just ridiculous. Gustave de Molinari, a 19th century French free market economist, was the first person in history to contemplate and advocate a free market for police protection. Molinari estimated that there would eventually turn out to be several private police agencies side by side in the cities and one private agency in each rural area. Perhaps, but we must realize that modern technology makes much more feasible branch offices of large urban firms in even the most remote rural areas. A person living in a small village in Wyoming, therefore, could employ the services of a local protection company, or he might use a nearby branch office of the Metropolitan Protection Company. But how could a poor person afford private protection? He would have to pay for, instead of getting free protection as he does now. That's my question exactly. There are several answers to this question. One of the most common criticisms of the idea of total private police protection. One is that this problem, of course, applies to any commodity or service in the libertarian society, not just the police. But isn't protection necessary? Perhaps, but then so is food and many different kinds, clothing, shelter, etc. Surely these are at least as vital, if not more so, than police protection. And yet almost nobody says, therefore, the government must nationalize food, clothing, shelter, etc., and supply these free as a compulsory monopoly. I do. Maybe not nationalization as such, although nationalization of essentials would most certainly benefit a great many people. But, under other political circumstances, I would push this even more so. But yeah, I absolutely think that there should be some sort of publicly accessible, adequate housing, publicly accessible water, publicly accessible food. Why is this an argument here? Why? A poor person couldn't afford police protection, you say, Rothbard quips. But are you saying that poor people shouldn't be homeless and starving also? Piff, piff. Are you kidding me? Ooh, $20. Thank you very much, Charlie Fairchild. Came to the chat late. I'm sorry if you already mentioned this, but do these ANCAPs already know about the Pinkertons and their history of being handmaids for corporations and terrorizing the workers? Yeah, the Pinkertons, the National Guards, all sorts of stuff. It seems like they just ignore any motivations for externalities, right? They ignore any motivations that a private company would want to hide or manipulate information about itself, and they ignore any of the anti-worker stuff. It's preposterous, to say the least. Okay. So, poor people wouldn't get police, but hey, poor people don't deserve food or shelter either. Ha ha ha, according to Rothbard. Let's continue. Very poor people would be supplied in general by private charity. Here comes that big one. Oh, charity will just handle everything. As we saw in our chapter on welfare. Okay, so chapter on welfare, short story long, or I guess long, short story short in this case. It'll just be charity that will take care of it. I mean, when have we ever seen a wealthy area with a poor, like, shanty town on the outside of it where people are starving and without adequate, food and shelter? Except for all over the U.S. and in the third world all the time. Okay. So, furthermore, in the specific case of police, there would undoubtedly be ways of voluntarily supplying... Oh, sorry. I'll mute my phone there. Okay. In the specific case of police, there would undoubtedly be ways of voluntarily supplying free police protection to the indigent. Either by the police companies themselves for goodwill, as hospitals and doctors do now. What? As hospitals and in certain cases, a doctor will, a homeless person comes in with like an ailment and they help it and they help the person and stuff. But like medical debt, has this person not heard of medical debt? Okay. Or by special police aid, which this will all be totally up to snuff, by the way. The billionaire comes in to protect his precious gemstones, and he has his police protection. And the charity case who has an abusive spouse or, had sexual assault or whatever, they have their provided for free quality police protection. Okay, yeah, right. Okay. Legal aid societies voluntarily supply free legal counsel to the indigent in trouble with the authorities. There are important supplementary considerations. As we have seen, police service is not free. It is paid for by the taxpayer. And the taxpayer is very often the poor person himself. He may very well be paying more in taxes for police now than he would be in fees to private and far more efficient police companies. Yeah, because he wouldn't be able to afford them. This is like the universal healthcare argument. Like, oh, well, the person is, if you're taxing them, they're paying this amount. Where if you let it be the free market, look how they're not paying as much. But then they totally ignore how people are going completely uninsured. People are not going to the doctor when they should have. People aren't getting the routine checkups that would have caught medical things that needed to be addressed, and then further down the line it ends up being more expensive. So this is all full of shit, as you can expect. Okay. Furthermore, the police companies would be tapping a mass market. With the economies of such a large scale market, police protection would undoubtedly be much cheaper. No police company would wish to price themselves out of a large chunk of its market, and the cost of protection would be no more prohibitively expensive than, say, the cost of insurance today. Yes, the cost of insurance, something prohibitively expensive that a lot of people can't afford. In fact, it would tend to be much cheaper than current insurance because the insurance industry today is heavily regulated by government to keep out low-cost competition. All right. There would be... I like that this book has large margins, though. For being the big, large text, large book, boomer version of this print, I do like the big margins to write in. There will be many competitive companies at first, then, like other industries, it will condense into a few monopolies, which price gouge and cut corners on services. All right, this happened with the internet boom, right? The dot-com bubble, and it also happened with other things. Cars, vehicles is another example that comes to mind. When the thing was first invented, there was a whole bunch of companies all competing. There was like hundreds of car manufacturers in the U.S. During the dot-com bubble, hundreds of like websites competing for this new market. And then, in capitalism, industries tend towards monopoly. And so now you have, just, Google and Yahoo and Netflix and YouTube and whatever. And you just have the major 4 car companies, all of which, they price gouge, they coordinate with each other to do kind of price fixing. They cut corners because they don't have any competition. Nothing new here, just capitalism totally failing to do the very few things it promises. No surprise. Okay, back to the text. There is a final nightmare which most people will have contemplated. Private protection agencies consider to be decisive in rejecting such a concept. Wouldn't the agencies always be clashing? Wouldn't anarchy break out, with perpetual conflicts between police forces as one person calls in his police while a rival calls in his? There are several levels of answers to this crucial question. In the first place, since there would be no overall state, no central or even single local government, we would at least be spared the horror of interstate wars. With their plethora of massive, super destructive, and now nuclear weapons. As we look back through history, isn't it painfully clear that the number of people killed in isolated neighborhoods, rumbles, or conflicts is as nothing to the total mass devastation of interstate wars? There are good reasons for this. To avoid emotionalism, let us take 2 hypothetical countries, Rutavania and Moldavia. If both Rutavania and Moldavia were dissolved into a libertarian society with no government and innumerable private individuals, firms, and police agencies, the only clashes that could break out would be local, and the weaponry would necessarily be strictly limited in scope and devastation. Suppose that in a Rutatavian, I don't know why he picked such country names, Ruritanian city, 2 police agencies clash and start shooting it out. At worst, they could not use mass bombing or nuclear destruction or germ warfare, since they themselves would be blown up in the Holocaust. It is the slicing off of territorial areas into a single government monopolies that leads to mass destruction. For then, if the single monopoly government of Moldavia confronts its ancient rival, the government of Rutavania, each can wield weapons of mass destruction and even nuclear warfare because it would be the other guy and the other country they will hurt. Furthermore, now that every person is a subject of a monopoly government, in the eyes of every other government, he becomes irretrievably identified with his government. The citizen of France is identified with his government, and therefore, if another government attacks France, it will attack the citizenry as well as the government of France. But if Company A, by the way, with this point, tribalism still exists, so I don't know why you couldn't just court some semblance of tribalism. But let's continue. But if Company A battles with Company B, the most that can happen is that the respective customers of each company may be dragged into battle, but no one else. It should be evident, then, that even if the worst happened and the libertarian world would indeed become a world of anarchy, we would still be much better off than we are now, at the mercy of rampant anarchic nation-states, each possessing a fearsome monopoly of weapons of mass destruction. We must never forget that we are all living, and always have lived, in a world of international anarchy, in a world of coercive nation-states, unchecked by any overall world government. And there is no prospect of this situation changing. I forget who said this, but I do agree with this point to an extent. An argument that I heard in regards to nuclear weapons and the way that the U.S. and tries to stop any other country from getting nukes, even though the U.S. has way more nukes than anybody else. The argument was that each country is like a man in a room, and having nuclear weapons is like having a handgun. So your ability to, protect yourself from the other men in the room, or your ability to make demands goes up with this. So, I don't know. Okay. A libertarian world, then, even if anarchic, would still not suffer the brutal wars, the mass devastation, the A-bombing that our state-ridden world has suffered for centuries. Even if local police clash continually, there would not be more Dresden. There would be no more Dresden, no more Hiroshima. He has not proven this. Potentially, a private security company could use bombs, etc. There's a large book on Blackwater that talks about Blackwater's massive stores of weapons, and wondering if we should live in such a society that allows a private protection company to own all kinds of like machine guns and helicopters and everything else. But there is far more to be said. We should never concede that this local anarchy would be likely to occur. Let us separate the problem of police clashes into distinct and different parts. Honest disagreements, in an attempt of one or more police forces to become outlaws, and to extract funds or impose their rule by coercion. Let us assume for a moment that the police forces will be honest. Let's read that again. Let us assume for a moment that the police forces will be honest, and that they are only driven by honest clashes of opinion. We will set aside for a while the problem of outlaw police. Surely one of the very important aspects of protection service the police can offer their respective customers is quiet protection. Every customer, every buyer of police protection would wish above all for protection that is efficient and quiet, with no conflicts or disturbances. No. See the KKK, whose violence was applauded. I think that the KKK could kind of be viewed as like a private defense force. I don't think that the there certainly was people who looked to the lynchings and stuff and thought, wow, that's horrible, or I don't, whatever. Like, people had various opinions of what the KKK was doing, but the KKK as a private force of sorts was incredibly ruthless and brutal and destructive and punishing its victims. If there even was crimes, the crimes were just wallpapering, to just a flimsy excuse to be incredibly brutal. So I don't believe for a second that a private police would, for the sake of the victims, as opposed to like the people who are paying their paychecks, would abstain from abusive treatment, especially at least in a obviously our current police state is horrendous, don't get me wrong, but at least there's some sort of like there's qualifications, there's trainings, and we can vote for and we can push for policies like body cams and dash cams, and sensitivity training and everything else. A private firm wouldn't want to spend the money on sensitivity training, and if they would want to cut corners on it or something, right? To say they're doing something for the sake of making their firm look nice, but avoiding the actual payments thereof. Okay. Every police agency will be fully aware of this vital fact. How long have we been streaming? About an hour. I I'm gonna stop at the courts, and then we will see if we want to keep going. Every police agency will be fully aware of this vital fact. To assume that police would continually clash and battle with each other is absurd, for it ignores the devastating effect that this chaotic anarchy would have on the business of all the police companies. To put it bluntly, such wars and conflict would be bad, very bad, for business. Therefore, on the free market, the police agencies would all see to it that there would be no clashes between them, and that all conflicts of opinion would be ironed out in private courts, decided by private judges or arbitrators. To get more specific, in the first place, as we have said, clashes would be minimal, because the street owners would have his guards, to get more specific, in the first place, as we have said, clashes would be minimal because the street owner would have his guards, the storekeeper his, the landlord his, and the homeowner and his homeowner his own police company. Okay. An ANCAP police state. Don't worry, clashes will be minimal. The street owners will have police, the stores will have police, the landowner will have police, the homeowner will have police. There'll be private police all over the place, so don't even worry. Okay, realistically, in the everyday world, there would be little room for direct clashes between police agencies. But suppose, as will sometimes occur, two neighboring homeowners will get into a fight. Each accuses the other of initiating the assault or violence, and each calls his own police company. Should they happen to subscribe to different companies, what then? Again, it would be pointless and economically as well as physically self-destructive for the two police companies to start shooting it out. Instead, every police company, to remain in business at all, would announce as a vital part of its service the use of private courts or arbitrators to decide who is in the wrong. Okay, so don't worry. In this totally free anarcho-capitalist society where you have to pay to use the public parks and stuff, the public park or the privately owned park police, the store police, the homeowner police, the street police, if there's clashes between them, then they will all defer to private courts. No big deal. All right, so the next section is on private courts. It is about as long as the other section. And then there's outlaw policies. I kind of want to skip to the outlaw policies if we're going to continue, but let me know. We've been going for an hour. Should we keep going or let's call it? Anarcho police is dumb. I can answer some questions and then we'll call it. We can go that route, or I can skip to outlaw protection. So let me know in the chat. Answer our questions and then let's call it a day, or skip to the outlaw stuff. I will wait for answers in the chat. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Okay. Keep going it is. I will skip the court part. Just for the sake of time. We already went for an hour. It's really gonna be going for a minute if we go through the court part. I imagine, okay, so we've got multiple private police companies fighting into infinity in this super police state of a society, and then so we'll have the courts come in, and then we will have endless courts. You know, why not? Why not in our totally free libertarian society? Why wouldn't we have multiple police agencies and multiple courts all fighting each other? I think that sounds wonderful. Okay. Cool. So, outlaw protectors. Continuing. We have saved for the last this problem. What if police or judges and courts should be venal and biased? What if they should bias their decisions, for example, in favor of particularly wealthy clients? What an interesting question. Wonderful for the capitalist to admit that they might be biased towards wealthy clients. We have shown how a libertarian legal and judicial system could work on the purely free market, assuming honest differences of opinion. But what if one or more police or court should become, in effect, outlaws? What then? This camera is so zoomed in. I apologize for that. Hopefully I'm looking okay. You can really see my, well, I don't have pores, but you can really see what's going on there. Okay. In the first place, libertarians do not flinch from such a question. In contrast to such utopians as Marxists or left-wing anarchists, anarcho-communists, or anarcho-syndicalists, libertarians do not assume that the ushering in of the purely free society of their dreams will also bring with it a new magically transformed libertarian man. This argument you might recognize from the Jordan Peterson and Slavoj Žižek debate. Leftists think the worker is intrinsically good. Nice meme, idiot. All right, let's keep going. We do not assume that the lion will lie down with the lamb, or that no one will have criminal or fraudulent designs upon his neighbor. The better that people will be, of course, the better any social system will work. In particular, the less work any police or courts will have to do. But no such assumption is made by libertarians. What we assert is that given any particular degree of goodness or badness among men, and purely libertarian society will be at once the most moral and most efficient, the least criminal, and most secure of person or property. Cool. Let us first consider the problem of venal or crooked judge or court. What of the court which favors its own wealthy clients in trouble? What if? In the first place, any such favoritism will be highly unlikely, given the reward and sanctions of the free economy. No, of course. Who's ever heard of a company favoring its wealthy clients? Don't be absurd. Not in capitalism. The very life of the court, the very livelihood of a judge, will depend on his reputation for integrity, fair-mindedness, objectivity, and the quest for truth in every case. This is his brand name. Should word of any venality leak out, he will immediately lose clients, and the courts will no longer have customers. For even those clients who may be criminally inclined will scarcely sponsor a court whose decisions are no longer taken seriously by the rest of society, or who themselves may well be in jail for dishonest or fraudulent dealings. This isn't anything we don't already deal with. What was that? That judge that was sentencing kids to crazy long sentences at the private prison, and he was getting money under the table for doing so. This stuff already happens. There's a comic strip that I like. It's a little 2-panel comic strip, and one panel is a businessman in front of the judge, and the judge is smiling with little hearts and stuff. Oh, we're so sorry that your company was caught, dumping illegal substances. Here, go ahead and pay this little tiny fine that doesn't even cover the cost of the damages you caused. And then the next panel is, you were smoking weed in a public park. We're going to throw the book at you, right? No, and I don't imagine a private system is going to be any the better in this. Cool. If, for example, Joe Zilch is accused of a crime or breach of contract and he goes to a court headed by his brother-in-law, No one, least of all other honest courts, will take this court's decision seriously. It will no longer be considered a court in the eyes of anyone but Joe Zilch and his family. Okay, but I mean billionaires who have their, billionaire judges and stuff that can get them off on anything. That never happens, right? That's not a real thing. I just made that up. Contrast this built-in corrective mechanism to the present-day government courts. Judges are appointed or elected for long terms, up to life. Excuse me. Boy, constant talking for a long time really gives you the burps. Okay. Judges are appointed or elected for long terms, up to life, and they are accorded a monopoly of decision-making in their particular area. It is almost impossible, except in cases of gross corruption, to do anything about venal decisions of judges. Their power to make and to enforce their decisions continues unchecked year after year. Their salaries continue to be paid, furnished under coercion by the hapless taxpayer. Oh, it's almost kind of like how, the stockholders of a company who are like totally corrupt are just able to go, unimpeded by the people who are obligated to use like the one corporate grocery store in their area, or if they're in a food desert where a grocery store wouldn't even spend the money to build a shop where they live, the 7-Eleven or something. They have no way of challenging, the owners of that company. This is a far more efficient system of keeping judges honest than the mechanism of government. Furthermore, the temptation for... I skipped, or I reread... Macy's earns its income from the mass of the population, not from a few wealthy customers. The same is true of Metropolitan Life Insurance today, and the same would be true of any metropolitan court system tomorrow. It would be the folly, indeed, for the courts to risk the loss of favor by the bulk of its customers for the favor of a few wealthy clients. That's assuming they don't totally sweep under the rug or deny any misdealings in like smoke-filled back rooms or anything like that. But contrast the present system where judges, like all other politicians, may be beholden to wealthy contributors who finance the campaigns of their political parties. Wouldn't in a private system they would be beholden to their wealthy contributors also? I mean, at least in a democratic system, you're voting with your votes rather than voting with your dollars or lack thereof. There is a myth that the American system provides a superb set of checks and balances, with the executive, the legislature, and the courts all balancing and checking one against the other, so that power cannot unduly accumulate in one set of hands. But the American checks and balances system is largely a fraud. I'd agree with that. For each one of these institutions is a coercive monopoly in its area, and all of them are part of one government, headed by one political party at any given time. Furthermore, at best there are only two parties, each one close to the other in ideology and personnel, often colluding, and the actual day-to-day business of government headed by a civil service bureau that cannot be displaced by the voters. Yes, this is a problem with consolidation of power. It's also a problem in capitalism with the consolidation of power. So, if you really want to be, an anarchist and get rid of unjust hierarchies, you would say, yes, let's break down these, entrenched political parties. Let's break down these entrenched capitalist systems as well. In contrast to the mythical checks and balances, the real checks and balances provided by the free market economy. Contrast to these mythical checks and balances, the real checks and balances provided by the free market economy. What keeps A&P honest is the competition, actual and potential, of Safeway, Pioneer, and countless other grocery stores. What keeps them honest is the ability of the customers to cut off their patronage. You folks might remember this from my video with American Johnson on slacktivism. These capitalists generally act in concert to fleece the people. Abraham Lincoln. Right? Capitalism tends towards monopoly. You end up with your Coke and your Pepsi, your Democrats, your Republicans, your Mac and your PC, your 3 or 4 corporate companies. I used to work for a department store and I did freight for them. And it kind of shocked me to the extent at which a lot of the companies were all the same. So like, let's say you have your 2 or 3 major detergent companies. You got your Tide and your whatever, your Downy and your Sun. Well, all of the boxes, like 90% of the options that were on the shelves, the boxes all had Procter & Gamble logos. Procter & Gamble owns Tide and Downy and whatever, or Unilever. Unilever owned like the entire like detergent and toothbrush and stuff section. So capitalism tends towards monopoly. Also, these capitalists, as Lincoln says, act in concert to each other. They price fix. Because they, like my example with the coltan, and whether it's a smartphone company, a laptop company, any company that's using coltan, they all have a motivation to hide the horrendous how coltan is mined in a horrendous fashion at gunpoint and everything else. They want to hide that. They want to hide the Foxconn suicide nets and stuff like that. They all have a motivation to hide that from the customer. So it's not, these people would seem to think that like Apple would want to expose, Dell for like how coltan mining is terrible, but they don't, because they both use that system. So these similar companies, there's a lot of ways in which they don't have competition, which they would want to work together to fleece the people. What would keep the free market judges and courts honest is the lively possibility of heading down the block or down the road to another judge or court, if suspicion should descend on any particular one. What would keep them honest is the lively possibility of their customers cutting off their business. Yeah, of course. I mean, if I think that like if I think Starbucks' coffee is too expensive, I can obviously just walk down the street to the next Starbucks and the next and the next. Oh, wait a minute. Capitalism tends towards monopoly. The capitalists work together to price gouge and stuff. So no. In some cases, like this does happen. It's not an intrinsic feature of capitalism that this should happen. What would keep them honest? Blah, 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 blah. Lies, lies, lies. Bullshit, bullshit. These are the real active checks and balances of the free market economy and the free society. The same analysis applies to the possibility of a private police force becoming outlaw, of using their coercive powers to extract tribute, to set up a protection racket, to shake down their victims, etc. Of course, such a thing could happen, but in contrast to present-day society, there would be immediate checks and balances available. There would be other police forces that could use their weapons to band together to put down the aggressors against their clientele. If the Metropolitan Police Force should become gangsters and extract tribute, then the rest of society could flock to the prudential, equity, etc. police forces who could band together and put them down. And this contrasts vividly with the state. So we've seen, right, police will go and they will take out, a drug ring. They'll take it out and then turn around and begin operating the drug ring themselves. We've seen that. We've seen police, they abuse forfeiture laws. There's the story of the guy. He was going to go buy a car off Craigslist. He had like $3,000 in his pocket. The police thought, there's no reason you should be walking around with $3,000 cash. You're obviously selling drugs, and they just took it. There's the case of police show up to a drug dealer's house. They break into his safe. They take, half the money, and then they report to the court that there was only this amount, and then they pocket the rest. So obviously, horrible things happen. But if a private police was doing a racket, please hydrate. I should hydrate. I have multiple beverages here. I have some PBR. I'll have a sip of that, and I have some water. I'll have a sip of that as well. Why not? Okay. Let's say, hypothetically, you have enough money to hire a private police force and to protect your store. And the private police force is like, hey, nice store. It would be a shame if something were to happen to it. And, and then they're like, they start running a protection racket and they're extorting you. You supposedly have like all this other money set aside that you could then hire another police force to fight the first police force. Like, yeah, no, that's not, there will be so many police forces. It's not even a problem. I mean, that's like saying, you find that, the perceived and planned obsolescence provided by cell phone company A, no problem, because you're just going to go to cell phone company B. Oh, wait, they all do that terrible thing. Huh, I guess capitalism sucks at doing like one of the few things it's supposed to be good at. Interesting. Let's continue. If a group of gangsters should capture the state apparatus with its monopoly of coercive weapons, there is nothing at present that can stop them. Short of the immensely difficult process of revolution. In a libertarian society, there would be no need for massive revolution to stop the depredation of gangster states. There would be a swift turning to the honest police force to check and put down the forces that had turned bandit. And indeed, what is the state anyway but organized banditry? You gotta wonder, okay, so like you're watching a debate between like Destiny and some knucklehead, or Vosh and some knucklehead, or Pig Puncher and some knucklehead, and they're like, such and such, a black person and white person kissed in this movie. That's white genocide. The same kind of thing is taking place here, right? You are like voting and living in a civil society. There's obviously problems, right? I'm an anarchist for a reason, but you're voting and living in a civil society, and you're using your tax dollars, and in exchange you get roads and public schools and stuff like that. That's rape and murder, basically. You gotta, when they're doing the hyperbole like that, you gotta know that there's it's motivated by being not entirely genuine in their argumentation. All right. What is taxation but a thief on a gigantic unchecked scale? Unchecked, like voting doesn't exist. Okay. What is war but mass murder on a scale impossible by private police forces? Again, I'd refer to the Blackwater book that discusses private security forces that have been horrible. What is conscription but mass enslavement? Can anyone envision a private police force getting away with a teeny fraction of what the state gets away with, and do habitually year after year, century after century? There is another vital consideration that would make it almost impossible for an outlaw police force to commit anything like the banditry that modern governments practice. One of the crucial factors that permits governments to do the monstrous things they habitually do is the sense of legitimacy on the part of the stupefied public. The average citizen may even strongly object to the policies and extractions of his government, but he has been imbued with the idea, carefully indoctrinated by centuries of governmental propaganda, that the government is his legitimate sovereign, and that it would be wicked or mad to refuse to obey its dictates. Okay, as an anarchist, right, I agree with this fact that the supposed legitimacy of the state in regards to, say, your votes count, and the things, the politicians who win are the ones that the public chose. That I obviously have problems with this, but I do believe in having some sort of a I believe in democracy, right? However we do that, if we're going to do direct democracy, if we're going to do liquid democracy, board account, I agree in people having equal say in what's going on in their lives. And capitalism is not going to get that for you. Not in the way that that working together democratically will. It is this sense of legitimacy that the state's intellectuals have fostered over the ages. aided and abetted by all the trappings of legitimacy: flags, rituals, ceremonies, awards, constitutions, etc. I recommend Michael Parenti has a lecture titled Super Patriotism, which I referred to in the review of Anarchism and Other Essays, my book review that I just had come out with. I recommend looking at that for a leftist critique of, patriotism. A bandit gang, even if all the police forces conspired together into one vast gang, could never command such legitimacy. The public would consider them purely bandits. Their extortions and tributes would never be considered legitimate, though onerous taxes to be paid automatically. The public would quickly resist this illegitimate demands, and the bandits would be resisted and overthrown. Once the public had tasted the joys, prosperity, freedom, and efficiency of a libertarian stateless society, it would be almost impossible for a state to fasten itself upon them once again. Once freedom has been fully enjoyed, it is no easy task to force people to give it up. I discussed this in my Capitalism Violates the Nap video, that if you were to have like a truly democratic workplace, it would be hard to get people to go back to the capitalist organized, basically dictatorial ran workplaces that we're used to. So I agree with this. I just don't that's the issue with like libertarian types, right? It's like they're against imperialism, they're against like the state monitoring like the Black Panther Party and stuff, but then their solutions are woefully inadequate. I think that their solutions will in turn garner less democratic, be less democratic than what we on the left propose. But just suppose, back to the text now, just suppose that despite all these handicaps and obstacles, despite the love for a newfound freedom, despite the inherent checks and balances of the free market don't exist, but suppose anyway that the state manages to reestablish itself. Then what? Well, then, all that would happen is that we would have a state once again. We would be no worse than we are now, with our current state. And, as one libertarian philosopher has put it, at least the world will have had a glorious holiday. Karl Marx's ringing promise applies far more to a libertarian society than to communism. In trying freedom and in abolishing the state, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain. All right, cool. What a ding-dong. So that is just about half, I guess, of the chapter on police and courts, found in For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard, which is, as far as I can tell, basically the anarcho-capitalist version of the Bread Book. So if you're interested in this kind of a thing, just to kind of see where the libertarian mindset is coming from, I recommend picking it up. It's a hoot. It's a hoot and a half. I will be reviewing this at some point. We shall see. Cool. I guess I'm going to stop on the reading for now for this one. I will be doing this probably again if it seems like people enjoyed it. So I think that I will do this again. So let's get some questions. If you folks have any questions, I hope you didn't have to buy that. Unfortunately, I did. Capitalism prevailed in that regard. Kama's toes. I fear like pronouncing people's usernames. It's like an anxiety to try and get these names right. So please submit your questions. Do a question mark. Do @RadicalReviewer. I will answer some questions here before we conclude, and then you can go off and enjoy whatever else you have to look forward to on your day. Questions. What are your questions? Questions for the radical reviewer. I think that I am. My internet, I think, is slow. I think that I am. I think that there is a lot of lag between myself and you folks. Kamazatis. Good. Can I pet please? Unfortunately, I am in an undisclosed location, so cannot be done. Could you also read some works on left Rothbardians, like some stuff from Roderick Long or Zek 3? I don't know. What another thing I planned on reading at some point. I was going to do this maybe in like a Audible Anarchist style video series, but I was going to do at some point Democracy for the Few by Michael Prenti is another thing that I plan on reading. But I think I'll keep going through this Rothbard book with you folks if you enjoyed it a lot. I don't know. I'm not seeing questions. I think that's it. That's it, right? Oh, questions. Okay. Does Rothbard answer what if the child consents, though? I haven't seen that one yet. The most disturbing take I've seen on in the book so far is his explanation for choice, which is your body is your personal property, and so you are allowed to remove people from your property. And so if you have and so the fetus is an individual who owns their own body, but you are allowed to expel them from your property. And then if they can't survive on their own, well, sucks for them, is basically his argument on pro-choice, which I mean, it's consistent. It's like consistent with his stance, I guess. But I don't know. That's a weird one for me. Scrolling up now, because now all of a sudden the questions are coming in. Computer is running slow. Okay. I already read that one. Also, I'm not sure if super chats are still working. So if someone can do like a $500 super chat just to clarify if this is working still, that would be wonderful. Do you always prefer physical copies, or do you like ebooks as well? I prefer physical copies for a number of reasons. I noticed that I mentioned in my How to Highlight a Book video that, you know, if I'm working a job where it's like really slow and I'm sitting at a register, people don't seem to care if you're sitting there with a book. Like, there's just something inherently like noble or something about reading a book that they, as opposed to looking on your phone. And so, yeah, I do like, so there's a few books that I do get in electronic copies, essentially just to be able to Control F, search a quote, because that's always a pain. When you really want to look at something specific, that's always a pain. Thankfully, a lot of stuff's on the Anarchist Library, so for reviews where I'm looking for something specific, I did this for my video that's coming out on Thursday with Reeducation. There was a quote that Aaron from Reeducation used, and I didn't know what page it was on, and I just went to the Anarchist Library and Control F'd the thing. Cool. Radical Reviewer question. Hi, I'm gay. Hi, Jamie. Welcome to being gay. Enjoy being gay. That's awesome. Thanks for the giggles, doggo. Awesome. Yeah. No, not a problem. Isn't it a hoot? Who would courts? Wait. Who would courts? It's moving too fast. How do I scroll up? Poor computer. My computer's been running so slow. Okay. Why would courts would be in an anarchist society? I don't understand these hand caps. Yes, I don't. It's a hoot, to say the least. Come on now. I'm gonna stop at 30 minutes, so I will answer questions until the 30-minute mark. I know I asked you about doing a book comparisons together. If you're interested, I can share a digital copy. Yes, that would be cool. I will enjoy a digital copy. I am currently reading a book for Bumundalak, and I'll be reading a book for somebody else that messaged me on Twitter, and I'll also be reading a book for Suck My Opinion. So I can't promise when I could get to it. Probably never, but hopefully soon. If 100 of us test Super Chat at $5, we know it's working. Yes, please do. I can't. It's not scrolling. I don't see. Okay. How old are you? The dog. I am the dog. I am 6. That is how old I am. I am 6. Cool. Well, I said I would go to an hour 30, so just keep submitting questions if you have them. And I will keep going for another 2 minutes. How's that sound? I just wanted to recommend you check out color-coded magnet bookmarks on Amazon. I find them useful. Cool. I typically, so if you've watched my review on my video on how to highlight a text, I like to use a half sheet of paper as a bookmark because then I can summarize the chapters as I go. I don't always remember to do that. The 2 books I'm reading right now have just folded in half sticky notes for bookmarks. You just got to do what you have to do. Do mutualists have their version of the bread book? I'm sure they do. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure it exists. Hopefully I can figure out this OBS where the video will be where it will work. Hopefully I'll figure out where it will work. Hopefully I will also figure out where the rate of the stream and your conversation will not be so off. That's my goals. This is just kind of a fun trying it out thing. So it will get better than this if it is something you folks want me to continue to do. So please let me know in comments and otherwise if like, wow, this was such a hoot, please keep doing this thing. And I will try. My schedule is going to start getting crazy, but I will try to do this. Do you want or plan on reviewing The Machinery of Freedom? I don't know about The Machinery of Freedom. Sounds promising. You like watching Sam Cedar trash libertarians? I do like watching Sam Cedar. I used to listen to the Majority Report. I worked freight at a pet store recently. I quit that job, but when I worked that job, I would listen to the podcast on there. What's your opinion on bourgeois poodles? Probably not all poodles are bourgeois. But I feel like that's like speciesist almost, right? To assume, right? It's like assuming that ladybugs are ladies, right? Many dogs can be Flophouse queens, as the Jesse no, what's his name? The guy from Deep Insider, the folk punk group. He's got that song about his dog. Says his dog's a flophouse queen. Some dogs can be flophouse queens. Some dogs can be bourgeois. It's not directly correlated to species. Great stream, comrades. Thanks for the shout outs and some more new streams. Woo! Yes. Go sub to Kamazots with the bat bat face there. Good up and coming channel. Would recommend. If you're like me, like just subscribe to all leftist channels. That's what I try and do. Just subscribe to all of them. Last couple questions here, and then I'm gonna get scooting. Maybe I'll go for a walk with my tasty adult beverage here and just kind of, because it is very warm in this room. Hot diggity dog, is it warm in here? Someone saying something about Perdone or Proud Hun. I was reading On Property, or what is property. I'm about halfway into it, but I've kind of set it aside. A little boring, but that's what it is. Question: how long ago was the last time you started a punk band? I'd started one punk band in about 2006, 2007, and I've basically been playing under that name since. However, I did fill in as the drummer for a friend's band on two occasions, with two different bands. Hello, Radical Reviewer. Awesome stream, but for the most part of you have great content. Woo! Awesome. Okay, that is it. Let's call it. Let's go ahead and call it, folks. So thank you for coming. I hope you folks have a wonderful rest of your day. I am signing off. Goodbye. See you next time. Oh, watch my video that's premiering Thursday. Thursday, 3 p.m. I think, maybe 3:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 6:30 p.m. Central, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Is that how math works? I'll be premiering my next review on Thursday. It has re-education in it. Please watch it. Cool. You folks have a good one. Bye.